Okay, I think probably everyone who's coming has arrived, so we will start. So welcome to this NUVIC Summer Induction session on A-Level Language and Literature. My name is Trevor. I'll take you through this afternoon's presentation. The purpose is to just briefly outline the structure of the course, to tell you what we study over the 2 years, to discuss a little bit what makes A-Level Language and Literature distinctive from, say, literature by itself or A-Level Language by itself, and to get you think about whether it's the right English, because we do the 3 different A-levels for you. Then I will introduce you to a couple of maybe new concepts that we kind of explore with English language and literature. A little bit of teaching and learning later on in the session. So introduce you to a couple of new concepts and just do a little bit of an activity, kind of text analysis, just a few lines of text that we will study during the course, just to kind of give you a feel for the kind of things that we do in A-level language and literature lessons. Now, I'm just going to take this slide away briefly. Stop presenting, just so you can see me on your screens, so I can say hello properly. So yeah, I'll outline the course, introduce some concepts, do a small activity, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. It's sort of Q&A at the end. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you this, my virtual classroom environment. Now, the reason I'm going to show you this is because of lockdown, basically. Obviously, we've experienced a lot of disruption last year with lockdowns, and what I've got here, just present again. Here we go. So this is you should see on your screen now, my virtual classroom, which I've been using during lockdown, when we've been doing online lessons. So that kind of gives you an idea of the feel of online lessons. If we have to go back to that, hopefully we don't. So hello and welcome. This is my virtual classroom. My name is Trevor. That's kind of an avatar of me on the sofa there. And I'm just going to take you through the structure of the course to begin with. So A-level language and literature. First thing I'm going to talk you through is the exam board and the kind of exam structure, how you're assessed at the end of the year, then get on to the more interesting stuff. So our exam board is Pearson EdXL. We've chosen EdXL because we find our students engage with the text better than the AQA exam boards. So, it's a similar AQA, but the EdXL is more kind of, we prefer it, and our students get really good results with this exam board specification. The exam is divided into 2 papers and coursework. The first paper is called Voices in Speech and Writing. This is where we explore how writers and speakers create different types of voice using language to create different kind of social identities. Paper 2 is called Varieties in Language and Literature. We've chosen a theme there, which is society and the individual. And there we're looking at how writers and speakers explore that theme, the link between sort of society, social groups, communities, and individuals. The 2 papers are worth 40% of your overall mark each. And then there is a coursework element on English language and literature. Again, there's a theme to the coursework, which we've chosen as belief and superstitions. And that's 20% of your overall mark. Over the 2 years, over the 2-year course, you will study the following texts. The novel that we look at in the first year under the theme of society and the individual is The Great Gatsby. Many of you may have heard of the book. Some of you may have even read it. Possibly you've seen a recent film with Leonardo DiCaprio made in the last kind of 10, 15 years. A great novel from the 1920s about the Roaring Twenties, the kind of boom time in early 20th century America, before the Great Depression, after the First World War. Fantastic novel, tragic novel about a kind of self-made millionaire and his love for this kind of unattainable woman. Fantastic novel that we look at in the first year, alongside Shakespeare's Othello. So one of the things we do in the first year is compare kind of looking at the theme of love, society, and the individual. The Great Gatsby with Shakespeare's Othello. And alongside this, in the first year, we study what we call the Parrot anthology of 20 non-fiction texts. If you can see the little bookcase on the left-hand side of your screen, you perhaps see the book on the bottom left-hand side has indeed got a kind of bright red parrot on the cover, and that's why we call it the Parrot anthology. So we have 20 different non-fiction texts that we look at from different genres, and we're studying the kind of voices that different writers and speakers create in non-fiction. Excuse me. Then in the second year, we have a new drama, 20th century drama by Arthur Miller called All My Sons, which is about a kind of industrialist. I suppose it's after the Second World War, set after the Second World War, and it's about this industrialist in America who knowingly creates kind of faulty parts for airplanes, for aircraft. He knows they're defective, but he sells them anyway, and that leads to some air disasters, and it's kind of about the kind of dilemmas and the scandal that attaches to this family, I suppose. Then the texts that we study for the coursework are Persepolis and The Crucible. Persepolis, I'll actually talk about Persepolis in a second, because I'm going to show you a page from that in a second. The Crucible, again, is by Arthur Miller. It's another drama. These are guide texts to help us explore the themes of beliefs and superstition of the coursework. And then finally, we also look at analysing unseen prose texts ready for an exam question where you're asked to analyse unseen prose. So those are the texts that we look at over 2 years. And of course, not only do you have the core texts here, but you're encouraged to read as much as you can, really, beyond this list of core texts. Read your own articles, novels, plays in your own time, and expand your kind of reading, independent reading in your own time. So those are the set texts. Now I'm just going to show you, I suppose, one of the interesting things about English language and literature, and what makes it distinct from literature and language, is kind of just the sheer range and diversity of the kinds of text that we look at. Now, I don't know if anyone has heard of Persepolis. Maybe in the chat, Persepolis is a book. Has anyone heard of the book? Or there's a film of it as well. Can you just tell me in the chat, have you heard of it or not? Persepolis. It's yes or no in the chat area. Have you heard of this book, Persepolis? No, it's possible that you haven't. What's interesting about Persepolis is that it is an autobiography, but it's in a kind of graphic novel form. So there's a page on your screen from Persepolis, and you can see it's like a cartoon. But we study it as a text, as an influence for our coursework. So although it's autobiography, you can see it's also a kind of graphic novel. And it's very different probably from what you've studied in either language or literature to date. So it's a non-fiction text, autobiography, but in this kind of very interesting and engaging format, kind of graphic novel. And then on the right-hand side, so graphic novel is very interesting genre that you probably haven't studied before. And similarly, in the Parrot anthology, we've got unusual, compared with GCSE, unusual texts such as radio scripts, screenplays, and so on that we analyse too. And the text you can see on the right-hand side of your screens at the moment is let me just get my pointer up. Oh, there we go. This is a radio drama broadcast on BBC Radio 4. And you can see from the kind of the layout of this text, the way it's set out, it's very different to anything you've studied before. Probably you've got kind of instructions to a technical team here, like the sound effects and the radio sound cues that are included in the script, such as the door closing, the typing sound, the quiet conversations, telephones, etc. So we're studying drama. We've got the characters and their parts, but we've also got the kind of interesting features of these unusual texts, like the sound effects and the instructions to the technical crew. So I guess what I'm saying here is we've got a very wide, diverse range of kinds of text that you look at in language and literature that you don't look at in literature or language. So it's a very interesting course from that point of view. And you should encounter lots of new things that you haven't come across before. Now, yeah, so why do we do language and literature rather than, say, literature by itself or language by itself? So the first thing is that you will have loved both of those GCSEs. You'll have, at school, loved equally doing literature and language, and you can't decide. You like both approaches, both sets of skills. You don't want to give up either. So you're kind of coming to A level thinking, I can't choose. I like both approaches. You want to build and develop your reading, creative writing, and language analysis skills. Of course, all of the 3 A levels do that. But what's unique about language and literature is what I put in the middle there, the creative writing. Your coursework on language and literature focuses on this kind of creative writing aspect, writing fiction and non-fiction pieces of your own original work. And that's kind of makes it a unique course compared with lit, where you do have coursework, but you study other people's books, famous authors' books, and language, where it's more of a kind of scientific study of language. Here, language and literature, the focus is really on creative writing in the coursework. So that's a unique aspect of lang and lit. And of course, as I've mentioned before, you study a wide variety of fiction and non-fiction texts. So you've got that mix of novels and plays, alongside a whole range of non-fiction genres, including screenplays and radio scripts, as I've said, autobiography, diaries, letters, etc., etc. So if you're interested in both fiction and non-fiction, Langlit is definitely for you. What kind of careers does A-level language and literature lead to? Well, the first thing is it's what we call a facilitating subject, which means when you apply for university, all of the English A-levels are well-regarded kind of stepping stones to getting onto a whole raft of different writing-based subjects. So whether that's history, classics, law, etc., etc. If it's a writing, humanities-based degree that you want to do at university, English A-level is always going to be a facilitating subject, a well-regarded subject by universities. English Langlit leads to a variety of professional writing and creative careers directly. So it's the perfect course if you're interested in becoming a journalist or an editor, working in publishing, being a copywriter, which is someone who writes advertisements, writes adverts, TV, magazines, etc., a screenwriter, or even a novelist. It's an obvious subject to study if you want to go on to become a teacher, as some of our students have those ambitions to go into teaching profession. And it's a great course for getting into areas like law, working in politics, the civil service, and a whole raft of other careers. But I guess what I'm pointing out here is, if you're especially interested in kind of the creative writing aspect, emphasizing again, you're interested in becoming a journalist or a creative writer or a writer, full stop, this is probably the English for you. Now, just to sort of explain the difference, because you may be umming and ahhing, is Langlit for me, or should I be doing pure literature or pure language? I'll just explain why you might choose pure literature over language and literature. So pure literature is more for you if you prefer reading rather than writing yourself, creative writing. If you really want to read and study other people's work and study fiction only, then literature is more for you. If this is the most important bullet point here, I guess, if you want to study poetry, we do not look at poetry on Langlit. So if you really love poetry, if you've got kind of affinity for poetry, you love poetry, you like to study poetry, then Langlit doesn't have a poetry element. You might want to think about doing lit instead. I'm not trying to put you off, by the way, but just explain the kind of differences between the 3 A levels. So if you want to study poetry, and it's really important to you to study poetry, literature by itself is probably more for you. And finally, if you want to study lit at university, and this is really only because of that poetry element, you might want to choose literature rather than Langlit. Although having said that, we have a lot of Langlit students who go on to study literature at university, very successfully, I might add, but the poetry element is missing. Pure language A level by itself is more for you if you're interested in the scientific study of language, what we call linguistics. If that's your interest, language is probably more for you. However, there are linguistic elements to language and literature. On pure language A level, we study the history and diversity of English as a language. So we study the English language, its history, and kind of the different varieties of English that are spoken around the world today. And in language by itself, we focus on the links between language, the way people use language, and real world social factors, I suppose, like class, ethnicity, gender, age, etc. Now, the reason I'm showing you these slides is not to put you off doing Langlit, but it's kind of explain maybe some of the differences between lit, Langlit, and language by itself, and just give you an idea if you're undecided. So, what's new at A level? If you study A level English, language, and literature, what will be new? You're combining skills and approaches from both sides of the GCSE English course, language and literature that you've done separately at secondary school. You put both of those kind of approaches and sets of skills together and kind of combine them in one course. One thing we do at A level, I suppose, is vastly expand the toolbox you have available to you, the tools that you can use to analyze language, the kind of different terms and techniques for analyzing language, vastly expanded. And I'll show you an example of us kind of, the new terminology that you might learn as you do A level. There's more focus on how writers and speakers craft language, create different types of voice. What we call voice in language and literature is very important. Sometimes it's called style, a writer's style or a speaker's style, how they create this unique, distinct kind of voice that we hear when we read that makes one writer seem very distinctive from another. So we focus on that kind of aspect of voice. We're really interested in language and literature at thinking about genres, audiences, and purposes, and the links between language and context. So what we call GAP plus C is really important at A level, thinking about different genres of writing, different types of writing, different audiences, different purposes of writing, and how the contexts of writers and audiences influence and shape the way writers and speakers use language. And finally, you'll get new ways of analyzing language from the scientific study of language, which we call linguistics. So there is a kind of bit of linguistics. We draw on the study of language, scientific study of language in Langlit, which you wouldn't in literature, for example. Let me just show you. So just to give you an example of a kind of new, new terminology that you're going to come across, we've got an example of a language feature, which you're kind of probably familiar with. If you have seen a lot of adverts this week on the TV, you might have even seen this advert. It's I can't remember what the product is. You've got Lewis Hamilton, he's introduced first, and then you've got a kind of nurse working for the NHS introduced second in its TV advert. And the catchphrase starts whether your life is about victories, that's your Lewis Hamilton, or your victories are about life, that's your nurse. You should buy this product. I can't remember what it is now. And you can see here that you've got a couple of clauses adjacent to each other where two sets of words have been swapped over. The word life and the word victories kind of swap places to create this kind of effect. Lewis Hamilton's life is about winning, about victories. The nurse's victories at work are about saving life. It got this very neat kind of language feature that has a very specific effect. It's kind of very neat, almost like a logical argument summed up in 2 phrases. I think what it's saying is kind of everybody, whatever your kind of goals in life, this product is for you. But this has a name. This technique has a name. It's called anti-metabole, from the Greek. The Greeks studied language techniques. They're really interested in how you influence people with language, and they labeled lots and lots of techniques. And this technique has a name. This is the repetition of words in successive clauses, but with the order swapped. So life swaps place with victories, the 2 successive clauses, and it creates this effect. And if you place the clauses on top of each other, so let's say they were in a poem, the words change place to form a cross. So the phrase is also called chiasmus sometimes, which is the Greek word for a cross. So what I'm showing you here is kind of how we're going to expand this toolbox of analysis terminology. And you'll find, you're used to talking about metaphors and similes, personification, nouns and verbs and adjectives, but that toolbox of labels for language techniques is going to explode and become huge, and you're going to encounter lots of new and interesting language techniques, ways of describing them. And this is just an example. Now, let's go back to this bullet point at the bottom. New ways of analyzing language from the study of linguistics. And I'm going to introduce you to some, maybe, hopefully, some new concepts on the next slide. So, in language and literature, and this is drawing more on the language, the linguistic kind of side of the course, we start to talk about language, and this is the way linguists approach language analysis, in terms of different levels or layers of language. And I'm going to get you to think that, firstly, we divide language into about 6 different layers or levels. I'm going to get you to think now about, see if you can work out what those levels are. If I tell you that the different levels of language are kind of equivalent to a child's development, language development from birth. And if you think about what a young child, a baby, learns about language first, second, third, and what kind of aspects of language come later, that maybe give you a clue to how linguists divide language up into layers. So I'm going to get you to just think about what you think the different units of language are. What does a baby learn first when they kind of learning language? What comes second? What comes third? What comes fourth as they learn to speak and learn to communicate with parents and carers? So just have a quick think. What do people think comes first in terms of language? What does a baby do first? What kind of aspect of language do they explore first? And pop your answers or your thoughts in the chat area. What do you think a baby can do first with language? And this is kind of thinking about the smallest unit of language. What babies do is they learn the smallest units of language first, then the next size up, then the things that come later are the big bits of language, I suppose, the larger chunks. Yeah, absolutely, Leon. The first thing that they do, before we understand what a baby is saying, thank you for contributing as well, is that they make noise, or sound. So this is our first layer of language, is sound. And I don't know if you've ever thought about it. Indeed, they try to make new words they hear in their noises, but the first thing they do is they make kind of almost nonsense sounds. And actually, on the language side, A-level language side, people are studying the development of language in children. And an interesting thing about babies is that they actually experiment with their mouths and practice making sounds, far more sounds with their mouths than they actually need to speak English. And very good, that is the first layer of language. So it's sound. The tiniest unit of language is sound. And linguists call this phonology. the first layer of language is called phonology, and you'll recognize the name from your phone, your telephone. It's to do with sound, where you see that prefix, phonology, phono, is to do with sound. What do we think comes after sound? So what do they do next? Once they've kind of practiced and learned how to make all the different sounds that they need to speak English, what do they do next? What comes next in their development? I think it's a fairly easy question. I mean, this isn't very challenging, you know. Yeah, they're copying what their parents do, Leon. They do indeed. But in terms of language development, after they start practicing the sound aspect of language, before they can do anything else, they start making sounds. What do you think is the next stage of development? What do they do next with language? Yeah, the next level and the next kind of developmental stage is individual words, and it's not so much describing things that act as labeling things. I mean, what we say labeling items in their immediate environment, mum, dad, banana, teddy bear, these kind of nouns, but it's words, individual words, and occasionally phrases. And that's the next level of language that linguists talk about. It's individual words and phrases and what they mean. And linguists call this lexis and semantics. Once you've got individual words, I'll go through these layers now, actually. The next thing that babies do is they put the words together to create sentences, and they learn how to ask questions or issue commands, imperatives, questions, interrogatives. And this level of language is called grammar and syntax. You can see sound is made into words. Words are put together to create sentences. The next layer above sentences is how sentences are put together to create different types of communication, almost different genres of communication. Linguists call this discourse structure. Discourse is just another word for communication. So linguists study how, for example, maybe a conversation is structured compared with, say, an article in a newspaper, compared with, say, a diary. These are all kind of different genres, types of communication. This is called discourse structure. Much later down the line, of course, babies learn how to read and write, and how language looks on the page when it's written down or printed. Linguists call graphology. That's the appearance of language on the page or a screen. And that's got its own level, graphology. And then finally is a language kind of, it's not really a level, but this is, linguists are very interested in how different contexts influence audiences' understanding of language. For example, where language is used to imply something beneath the surface, or to create humor and jokes. And this is called pragmatics. So what I'm doing here is introducing you to kind of extra layers of analysis that we can't start to explore at A-level. And you'll be familiar with aspects of these layers. When you're looking at let's take explorations of maybe poetry, which we don't do at Langlet. But if you're looking at a poem, what kind of effects that a poet might use might come under the language level of phonology? If you're looking at the sound effects in a poem, what kind of techniques might linguists label as phonological sound effects? Can somebody pop some ideas in the chat? What kind of things are what kind of language techniques do you think might come under the heading? Now, I think pathetic fallacy, which is a great language technique. That's the one, remember, where the mood of the weather reflects the mood of the character. That's more of a discourse structure type of thing. That's kind of in the genre of fiction, type of communication fiction, where we might use that effect over several sentences. Pathetic fallacy is going to be more of a discourse structure technique. Just getting you to think about sound. What kind of techniques that we look at in language analysis, English study, might we label as sound effects. Absolutely, Leon. Yeah, spot on. So onomatopoeia would come under the language level of phonology. This is where the sound of the word reflects, describes the sound that it labels. No, yeah, that's okay. Let's pop it in. I'll pop it in the chat myself so we can onomato po EIA. It's like that, just so that you have a, yeah, it's quite a tricky one to spell that. Yeah, so linguists have these language levels. Phonology is about sounds, and things like onomatopoeia, alliteration, sibilance, all of those sound effects are kind of phonological effects. Now, we're going to have a look at a brief bit of text for the last kind of 10 minutes, looking at the kind of activity that we might do, looking at non-fiction text in language and literature, and maybe I'll just show you how those language levels maybe apply to some analysis of a text that you're kind of familiar with. So we'll do an activity where hopefully this isn't way beyond what you've done before, but you can maybe see how we approach a text and how we apply those language levels. I'll just explain where this little bit of text, so we're going to look at a bit of text on the screen. I'll just show you where it comes from first. So hopefully on your screen now, you should see a page from our anthology of non-fiction texts. This is an example of reportage. Jessica Reed has written this article, an experience that she had where she survived an earthquake while scuba diving. Sorry, so it's about a diver. It's an eyewitness account, and it's published in the Guardian magazine at the weekend. It's titled "Experience: I survived an earthquake while scuba diving." So a very, very dramatic event. Now, reportage is a specific genre of writing where either a professional journalist or an eyewitness has seen something, has been on the ground where something newsworthy has happened and has reported it back. So reportage kind of means carrying back or reporting back. So this is where the extract comes from. We're just going to have a look at the opening couple of lines. It starts like this: "I've been scuba diving for 15 years. I love the calmness of being submerged, the hypnotic sound of my breath, and the quiet clicks of fish eating coral." Is the opening line. So say the genre is reportage. It's an eyewitness account of a newsworthy event. It can be a professional journalist or just a bystander. We can see this is a very dramatic event. You can imagine being underwater, you're diving, exploring, suddenly an earthquake happens. So it's kind of a very interesting experience to report about. Now, when we look at these non-fiction texts in language and literature, first couple of questions we ask ourselves are about, the personal. Well, that's a very good question, Akdas. And I would say sometimes with professional journalists, they try and add a kind of layer of detachment, because that's, professional journalists try and be detached. But most commonly, absolutely, reportage tends to have a first-person perspective. So two questions we ask ourselves when we first look at a text is, is this a personal or impersonal text? Is it detached and kind of distance, or is it personal involvement? And the second question is, what is the level of formality? Is this a very formal text, or is this an informal text, or somewhere in between? So if we look at the opening, what can we say about personal or impersonal, formal or informal? Is this a personal text or impersonal? Is it formal or informal? And where are the clues? So if you've got any ideas, just pop them in the chat there. What can we say about those two things? How formal is it? Is it personal or impersonal? I mean, I think it's fairly straightforward to see whether it's personal or impersonal. But we can see we've got the first person singular pronoun I at the beginning of the first two sentences. This is definitely a personal text. So one thing we do in language and literature is we link language features like the use of the first person perspective with the genre. So reportage, as Akdas has written in the chat area, is usually from a first person perspective. So we've got that link between language and genre. What about the level of formality? What can we say about this in terms of formality? What have we got? So we've got our first person perspective. Is this very stiff and formal, or has it got a more conversational, informal feel? And where's the evidence? I suppose that's what I'm asking. Agdas, can you explain why you think that? Yeah, absolutely. We've got this I apostrophe VE. Does anybody out there know how we label this language technique? We've got a syllable removed, the have. It's not quite slang, but it is what we call colloquial language. I'll write that in the chat. Colloquial means it's associated with speaking rather than writing. So we've got the first person perspective. This is a writer giving their personal views on an issue, possibly a subjective point of view, possibly exploring their feelings. Yeah, it is more conversational because we've got this first person perspective and the what's called elision. The technique is called elision, where we take out a syllable and put an apostrophe in its place, and it creates a more conversational tone of voice, a more informal, relaxed, chatty tone. And that will link with the audience. It will help create a rapport, a closeness between the writer and the audience, and make them more relatable and for a closeness, I suppose, is what's formed here. So a couple of first questions we ask ourselves is the level of formality and the level of personal engagement. And this is a personal, informal text. It's more relaxed and conversational. This establishes a connection or rapport with the reader or audience. Okay, let's have a look at the rest of this opening sentence. So what else can people spot here? Let's move on. So we've got, I've been scuba diving for 15 years. I love the calmness of being submerged. I'm thinking about context here. What do we learn about this diver? I've been scuba diving. Remember, they're about to encounter an earthquake, a very dramatic event underwater. There's a major earthquake underwater. What do we learn about them in terms of their diving experience? Scuba diving for 15 years. I love the calmness of being submerged. Yeah, I mean, we've got this kind of idea of the enjoyment of being with peace, of being at peace with nature. This kind of, it's got a very calm, peaceful opening, this text, which when if you look at this text in the future, you'll see a contrast with the kind of drama of the earthquake and the noise of the earthquake. What about their experience as a diver? What are we learning about this diver in terms of context? Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Leon. That's spot on. So we've got, basically an experienced diver, somebody who's been doing it for a long time and has a passion for the sport. It's a sport. It's a leisure activity. It's not something you do because you want to. You don't expect to be fighting for your life, I suppose. But we learned that this is an experienced diver who loves the sport. It's not a beginner. So that kind of contextualizes what happens. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a sense that it's recommended. It's kind of almost an advert for diving at the beginning of this text. Yeah, and it kind of emphasizes this aspect of diving as being a hobby or something you do for pleasure, for enjoyment. And it's got this kind of, well, yeah, what else do we spot in this opening sentence? Any other language techniques that we can see? Let's have a look at the second part. I love the calmness of being submerged, the hypnotic sound of my breath, and the quiet clicks of fish eating coral. What kind of patterns or kind of what's the kind of sense, the overall sense of what kind of semantic fields do we find? What kind of patterns in the language can you spot in that second sentence? Any ideas at all? Okay, well, I'll point out a couple of things. So let's go through. So we've got this first person pronoun we've talked about, and the elision to create this sense of informality. We've got a kind of reference to the context of experienced diver who loves being underwater, and the sense of diving as a kind of leisure activity rather than a job, I suppose, an experienced diver. Now, this is probably a new term to you. The verb love, to love, is what we call a stative verb. It's a verb about a state of being, a state of mind, if you like. If you love something, it's how you feel rather than something you do. So stative verbs are used when writers talk about thoughts and feelings and sensations. And here it's kind of got very positive connotations of this stative verb, to love. We know that this text is going to be about. Yeah, absolutely, Leon. We've got some adjectives here, especially hypnotic and quiet. Both adjectives. But what else have we got? Well, we've got something. Do you remember I was talking about the language levels? Syntax is about word order. And what we've got here as well is a triadic structure, or a rule of three, list of three. I love this. One, calmness of being submerged. Two, the hypnotic sound of my breath. And the quiet click of fish eating corals. What we call a triadic structure. Now, a syndetic list, has anybody come across this term before? Syndetic list. This is simply a list that has a conjunction in it, like and. So calmness of being submerged, hypnotic sound of my breath, and is the conjunction, the quiet click of fish eating coral. Three-part list with an and conjunction is what we call a syndetic list. So linguists would describe this as a syntactic feature of syntax, or word order, a triadic structure, and a syndetic list. So this is kind of give you an idea of kind of the technical vocabulary that we start to use at A level, the level of detail we go into. But then we also need to think about the effect on the audience. What's the effect? Well, we have a rule of three, or list of three, triadic structure that creates this kind of emphasis, a sense of emphasis, stress. And what's being stressed here? Well, these are nouns and noun phrases and adjectives that develop a semantic field of sound and tranquility, creating an opening mood that contrasts with the earthquake that comes later on. So we've got a kind of mood of relaxation, calmness, tranquility, soft sounds, the sound of my breath, the calmness, quiet clicks of fish. It's kind of calm before the earthquake that comes a little bit later. Let's just look at one more feature. Because I was talking about sound. Let's move on. Let's just do. Yeah, one last question, because I think we're running out of time. Actually, we started 5 minutes late, so we'll go on for 2 or 3 minutes more. In this second part, second sentence or two, this was my 40th dive, so I knew the drill. I saw luminous corals, languorous turtles silhouetted in the deep blue of the ocean, and hundreds of tropical fish. So again, we've got this kind of emphasis on the experience of the diver. 40th dive, they've been diving. That's a lot of dives, actually. 40th dive, they really are experienced. And this idiom, I knew the drill, kind of means I knew what to do in emergencies, how to kind of cope with all kinds of eventualities. Interesting adjectives, luminous and languorous, to do with relaxation and beauty. I want you to focus on this last question. Think about the following questions. What sounds are repeated often in this sentences? So if you look at this sentence, let's focus on consonants, actually. What sound is repeated again and again in this sentence? Do you know what we might label this technique? And what is the effect on audience. So what sounds repeated? What of those language levels that we talked about before does it link to? Do you remember the language levels I talked about? What would we label this technique? What language level would it belong to? What's the effect on audience? Have a quick look at that last sentence. Absolutely, Actus. Thank you. You're spot on. It's you could call it alliteration, but you're certainly right. The letter L is repeated again and again. It's at the beginning of luminous. It's the beginning of languorous. But notice it's actually at the end of drill. It's in the middle of turtles. It's in the middle of silhouetted. It's in the middle of blue. So we've got this, and corals as well. So it's not just at the beginning, which is alliteration, but it's in the middle of words as well. Now this technique has a different name where consonants appear not just at the beginning, in the middle of words. Does anybody know what that technique is called? You may not recall, or you may not have come across it before. I'm going to show you a list now of sound effects. We'll come back to that screen in a second. So I don't know if you know all of these sound effects: alliteration, assonance, consonants, sibilants, onomatopoeia, cacophony, which is where you have lots of harsh sounds clustered together, euphony, which is where you have lots of harmonious sounds clustered together. It's not either of those last two that I'm thinking about. From that list, which best fits? Do we know? Now, Leon, assonance is happening, but assonance is about vowel sounds. This is about consonants sounds. So I think that probably pretty much gives it away. I think we've got euphony as well. I think there is a harmonious kind of collection of sounds here, the sounds that work together. You could argue absolutely that it is euphonic, or an example of euphony. There is assonance, but the L sound is actually our consonants. Oops. Now, last couple of slides. This slide here. So this gives you an idea of the level of detail you can go into at A-level language and literature. This gives you a kind of way of describing all of the different consonant sounds that you make in English. There are 24 different sounds used to make the English language, and there they are on a grid. There's 20 additional vowel sounds, so basically you need to be able to make about 44 different sounds with your mouth to be able to speak English. And we'll see the L has got a label on the left-hand side. It's called a liquid, and you've probably heard of plosive, alliteration, maybe fricatives before. The L sound, you'll see, is on a line called liquids. The top row, the place of articulation, that's whereabouts in your mouth you make the sound. This is a liquid consonant, L. So linguists label the different consonants in different ways. And you can see that some of them are harsher and some of them are softer. Fricatives like f and v tend to be softer. So what we've got here is, let's just go, the consonants of liquid L. What language level that I mentioned earlier does this belong to? It's phonology. And what's the effect in the audience here? Now, I'm skipping through very quickly because I think we need to wrap up. It's a phonological technique. It's a sound technique. It's the sound effect or repetition of a gentle, soothing, and relaxing sound, the L sound, that adds to this mood of relaxation. So I'm sorry I rushed through at the end, but I guess what I'm doing here is give you an example of the kinds of level of analysis that we go into language and literature, and how we try and combine these different language levels of phonology, sound effects, individual words like lexis and semantics, and bigger units of language like sentences and whole texts. And we can see how here the L sound combines with very positive adjectives like luminous and languorous to kind of amplify the effect of the language on the audience, I guess. Well, hopefully this gives you some kind of idea of kind of analysis of text that we do at Lang and Lit level. It's just kind of give you a snapshot of the sort of things that we look at and explore. Thanks for attending and participating today. This is the kind of last section of the presentation where I invite you to ask any questions. So does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Pop them in the chat, or you can put your microphone on if you fancy asking a question by using your microphone. Any questions at all? Yeah, Leon, good question. Syntax. So when we're talking about language, syntax is to do with the structure of sentences, really. And it's really about the word order, how words are ordered in a sentence to create different meanings. I mean, to give you an example, in English, if you say something like, the lion ate the man, that creates one sense. If you change the word order around, the man ate the lion, you know, the syntax or the way the words are ordered in the sentence has kind of changed the meaning of that sentence, radically changed the meaning of that sentence. So syntax is the study of how, you know, word order, the way words are ordered in a sentence, changes the meaning of the sentence or changes the meaning of the language. Does that answer your question? Hopefully it does. Yeah. So syntax is about word order in sentences. Any other questions at all? Well, great. I hope you got something out of that kind of little presentation about language and literature. And maybe you can see a bit more how it fits in between lit and language by themselves. The last slide that's going to go up on the screen has got some important information about enrolling hereafter and what you need to do next. So I'll just talk you through the information on that final slide. Thanks for attending, as I say, this afternoon and participating. A few contributions in the chat there. It was great. Thank you very much. So enrollment information. Thursday, the 12th of August is the first day for enrollment. Your results come out on the 11th, I believe. If you've already applied to the college, you will receive a link via email to enroll the day before your GCSE results day. So look out for that link via email. If you haven't applied already, you need to visit newvic.ac.uk/apply. And it should be fairly straightforward and self-explanatory once you get there. Once you've received your final GCSE results in August, click the link in the email and upload your results. And wait for a call from the college to complete the process. I believe you'll probably be invited to come in on specific times of specific days because of the fact that we're still not, you know, fully out of the pandemic. Normally, we'd have everyone in, you know, everyone could come together on the same day at the same time. We have queues of people down the street and everyone comes at the same time. But I think because of social distancing, it will have to be organized slightly differently this year. Anyway, wait for your call from the college and we'll invite you to come in on a specific day at a specific time. Okay, is that, take it from the chat, there's no further questions. So that's the end of the presentation. Hope you got something out of that. Hope that kind of clarified in your minds what we do at Langlit and some of the features that make Langlit unique. If you have any questions, I think you can put them to the marketing department and they'll forward them to me. So if you think of something that you want to ask afterwards, by all means, email us later on. And actually, just put my email address in the. You can email directly if you want. There we go. It's there. Trevor.harris@newvic.ac.uk. Thanks for coming, and hopefully we'll see you all in August/September of this year. Good luck with your GCSE results, and have a good summer. Okay, thanks for participating. Bye for now.